And breaking tonight, special counsel Robert Mueller claims the former Trump campaign chair, Paul Manafort, has violated his plea deal by allegedly lying to the FBI on multiple subject matters. Manafort claims he's been truthful, but Mueller's office argues in a filing that the government will also file a detailed sentencing submission to the probation department and the court in advance of sentencing that sets forth the nature of the defendant's crimes and lies, including those after signing the plea agreement herein. Manafort was convicted on 8 counts related to bank and tax fraud in Virginia earlier this year. In one explanation of tonight's development, ABC News is reporting that special counsel prosecutors were, quote, not getting what they want. That according to one source with knowledge of the discussions. So from Manafort to the border wall, much to discuss with tonight's Power Panel. Let's bring in tonight's folks, Democratic strategist Zach Friend, former State Department press officer Morgan Ortagus, and Fox News contributor, opinion editor at the Washington Times, Charlie Hurt. Good evening, all.
Good evening, Ed.
Good evening.
Hi, Ed.
Zach, I want to start with you. In Manafort, there is one sentence that does not appear in any of this court filing. Nowhere does it say Paul Manafort turned on President Trump.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I worked at a law enforcement agency for almost a decade, and I'll tell you that the one thing that always seems to come back and bite people is when they're not truthful. The one thing that law enforcement and prosecutors hate more than anything is when people don't come clean on things. And I think what you're seeing here is actually exactly that, is the Mueller group basically saying, look, you're not being truthful with us. We're going to make sure that we can come after you with all we got. But
Charlie Hurt, you know, as a Trump supporter, we've been hearing about collusion and obstruction of justice for months and months and months. Nothing has really been produced on either. And now Paul Manafort, the man that many on the left was hoping at some point would turn on the president, turns out he, according to Mueller anyway, has been lying left and right. So even if he did have something he wanted to say about the president, does he have any credibility left?
That's a great point. You know, and if you go back to the original charges and what Manafort was convicted on, of course, none of that had to do with the aforementioned purpose of Mueller's investigation in the first place, which was Russia collusion. I think that that's an important point. But I think the even more important point is what we have now, and that is that you know, obviously Mueller is not going to drop Manafort as a witness if he's producing, and that raises two important questions. One is whether he's producing anything, and the second thing is whether he even has anything to produce. Right. And either one of those would seems to be probably good news for Donald Trump today.
Now, Morgan, I mentioned that the Manafort legal team is insisting he did not lie, so all of this will come out one way or another. We'll find out. But if he did lie, and is going to face even more criminal charges on top of what he was already found guilty in Virginia, there are some people on all sides of this debate, left and right, saying on social media tonight, this may be more than anything about Paul Manafort trying to get a pardon from the president down the road because he's facing a mountain of crimes.
I think that sounds a little fanciful. I don't think that he's basing his entire testimony over trying to get a pardon from the president, especially considering that there are still state crimes to be tried for, which the president wouldn't have pardon authority for. Anyway, I think what we're going to see, what you said in your earlier report, is that if Mueller and his team are going to allege that Manafort has been lying, they're going to have to actually prove this, and they're going to have to do that in that court filing that you referenced. I expect an amount of evidence to be in there. There will have to be a mountain of evidence if they're going to show that he was lying what he was lying about. Yeah. I spoke to some FBI sources, friends of mine who are retired, who have been involved in these sorts of investigations earlier today, and they made the point that they thought that this pointed to really potentially a bad investigation, a bad case before they made the deal with Manafort. They thought it was, listen, it's very weird to have a testimony like this, a witness like this, who then you turn around and have to press charges against him. So they think it's quite suspicious that maybe there wasn't the case of Russian collusion that perhaps they thought they would get out of Mueller once he started to testify.
All right, let's shift gears to immigration. The president had a big rally in Mississippi. We've got a big Senate battle that we're going to talk about later in the show in Mississippi that's going to determine the balance of power, the last Senate seat to be decided. President rallying for the Republican Senate candidate, and here's what he said about the wall. Okay. All right. Apparently, that soundbite is not there. But the bottom line is the president was talking about the wall and was saying, that the migrant crisis, Zach, shows him that this finally has to be built. And my question to you is, if a lot of these migrants are simply seeking asylum, why are they assaulting U.S. law enforcement?
I mean, I think that's a fair question, but I think that actually from a broader standpoint, Ed, I mean, one of the things that I think about here is that what actually drove people, mothers, to walk 2,000 miles with infants and toddlers to do this. Obviously, the situation in their home country is untenable. It's very telling about the situation in their home country.
Okay, pardon me. I'm going to let you say that, and we can go on about that. But you're not answering my question, which is, if they have such a horrible situation in their country, and they want to be in America, and they love America, allegedly, why are they attacking U.S. law enforcement? Why are they not coming peacefully? Why are they assaulting U.S. law enforcement? Please answer that.
Well, as I said, I think that's a fair point, and I think as the Border Patrol has also noted, this is actually a very small group of people within the overall caravan that are seeking asylum that have become agitated over what I would assume would be the delay in amount of time to actually be able to seek asylum within the United States. There's never an acceptable situation by which you would attack either a U.S. military, U.S. law enforcement, or any kind of U.S. entity in general. So I'm in total agreement with you on that.
Okay.
But I think that the broader issue, though, Ed, is just it's telling on both sides. I mean, it's telling on what kind of country they're trying to come into if we're tear gassing people, and it's telling of what kind of country they're leaving if they're willing to. I mean, what parent? I mean, I'm a parent. What parent wouldn't want? I mean, I would do the exact same thing. I wouldn't attack U.S. law enforcement, but I would definitely walk for 2,000 miles just on a hope situation to make my kid's life better.
Okay, but there's another way to look at that in terms of a parent, Charlie, and it is what parent would put their children in the middle of what is a violent situation?
Sure. And, of course, if they want to seek asylum, they should seek asylum in the first country they come to, and that should have happened long before they reached the border. The U.S. border should have happened in Mexico or wherever. But the other thing is, look, the bottom line is we have laws, we have a border, and we have the right, we have the requirement to protect that border. And you've had both parties have had control of Congress in the past 10, 15 years that if they wanted to change these laws, they could have changed these laws. They didn't change these laws. We have people on the border enforcing these laws that are on the books. And to sit back and armchair criticize the law enforcement agents for enforcing the laws that have been duly put on the books, I think is reckless and dangerous.
Morgan, I've got 20 seconds. What about the idea that Chad talked about with the funding? Is there a chance for a partial government shutdown because the president wants the wall funding?
I think that there's a big chance for it, Ed. At this point, I sort of expect it to happen if Congress doesn't make a deal before this December 7th shutdown. It wouldn't be an entire government shutdown. It would be a partial government shutdown as it relates to Homeland Security funding. I think this is the president's last best chance to get the border wall funding because he's going to have a hard time getting it with Nancy Pelosi in charge.
Yeah, no doubt. A new power dynamic coming in January for sure. Zach, Morgan, Charlie, appreciate all your insights.
Thanks, guys.